All right, welcome back, class, to our series of videos in the Entrepreneurship course. This is Assumptions. Boink. Take two. Take two today and take two. If you've noticed, the board's probably laid out a little bit differently. Figured out a new way to deliver assumptions because there was still some confusion around what are assumptions and what do I do as an entrepreneur around assumptions. So you're getting the new and improved lecture on assumptions. All right, let's remind ourselves where we are and where we've been. We've been working in the opportunity cycle, being creative, coming up with ideas, framing our hypothesis. Now what's next is we're going to identify the assumptions in our hypothesis so that we could design experiments, make a plan, conduct experiments, and get feedback and ground our hypothesis. Let's remind ourselves, what do entrepreneurs do? We make it up and we test it. So we have to remind ourselves that our hypothesis is made up. We're not really sure if it's real or everybody else in the world believes in the same thing we believe when it comes to our hypothesis. So assumptions, to me, an easy way to think about this is assumptions are things we are not sure about in our hypothesis. Are we sure about the customer? Are we sure about the problem? Are we sure they have the problem? Are we sure our solution's going to solve the problem? Things like that. And then I looked up the dictionary definition of assumptions, and I really like this. It said, accepted as true without proof. Accepted as true without proof. And so as an entrepreneur, when we take a step back and we frame our hypothesis and we look at it, we can ask ourselves, what are we accepting as true without proof in that hypothesis? Well, the great news is, as entrepreneurs, we're going to go test it. So our hypothesis, anything that's accepted as true without proof, we are going to identify as assumptions. Then we're going to design experiments in order to test it. So that's the process we're going through. Why are assumptions so important? Assumptions are super important because, boom, assumptions kill ideas. So let's consider this. We have a value proposition as a hypothesis, a customer unmet need solution benefit, and we feel very confident in that. So we actually start building a brand and we build our service and we go to market with our service. Well, if there was an assumption, something we accepted as true without proof or something we were not sure about, and we go to market and all of a sudden we're like, whoops, didn't think that was going to happen. Those assumptions that we don't test and prove will kill our idea. And so before we go through all of that, we want to test assumptions and identify them. So step one today in today's lecture is, how do we identify the assumptions in our hypothesis? Like, how do we know what we are accepting as true without proof? It's almost like we're unconscious about it, right? So there are two basic questions that we want to ask anytime we write our value proposition as the hypothesis. And let's go through this with a case study. So before we get to those questions, we're going to introduce a case study. The case study is on a business called Caress. And you're going to watch the video on Caress in a moment, and then we're going to move forward. So let's watch the video. Here it is.
I'm the fourth generation family member here on the same piece of ground in Modesto, California. When you grow corn and you've got a corn crop that's 16 feet tall, you can't walk an entire 80-acre field and really look at all the low points or some of the areas that don't have the best yields. So what the aerial imagery allowed us to do was it allowed us to pinpoint areas in our field where water wasn't being distributed efficiently. I had a decent idea of where I thought there were areas in the field that needed attention. It really did open our eyes, and it allowed us to look at pieces of the particular fields that did need some extra attention. Plays into the sustainability of our farm, as well as utilizing precious resources like water.
All right, welcome back. That was the video on Caress. So I've taken the opportunity to write Caress's hypothesis and their value proposition so we can move forward. So to me, the value proposition of Caress is the following. Farmers with large field crops. So not small farmers, but farmers with large field crops. Think big fields of soybeans or corn or whatever like that. What is their unmet need? What is the problem that they have? Well, the unmet need is they want better crop yield. So if I got 10 acres of crops, I want to maximize the yield of that. And they're also struggling with drought and pests. So if you remember in the video, they took photos of the field and the dark spots were the dry spots. So they want better crop yield. They struggle with drought and pests. The solution is we are going to fly drones over top the crop, over top the field. We're going to take images, and then we're going to translate the image into data that is usable by the farmer so that they can make decisions on how to irrigate or pest control their entire field. So we're going to provide them field crop data, captured images by drones. The benefit to the farmer is increased yield, lower cost, and conservation of water and pesticides and things like that. All right, here's the value proposition. That is our hypothesis. That is making it up. That's where we are, early stage entrepreneurship. So let's identify the assumptions in this case study that Caress is making. Question number 1 we want to ask. What are the technology challenges? So take a moment and think through. If you are Caress, this is your value proposition. What are the technology challenges you are making? What are the technology challenges you are making? Take a moment to write a few of those down. All right. So question number 1, what are the technology challenges? What did you come up with? Oh, excellent. Those are great. The technology challenges that I came up with, similar to yours, are, can we build drones? Or do we need to buy them? What are the FAA rules of flying drones over fields? Can the drones deliver accurate, good images? Can we translate images to usable data? Usable data. What's the battery life of a drone? Do drones have enough, can they fly far enough? Their range, the distance, the range. So these are some of the technology challenges that we will have to overcome in order to deliver our hypothesis. So we're accepting them as true without proof that we can build drones, that we know the FAA rules, that we can deliver images, that the batteries last long enough, that there's usable data that we can get, that there's the distance and the range, et cetera, et cetera. So it would make sense then that we want to test these assumptions prior to launching our business and going out and finding a bunch of customers. So we call these types of assumptions feasibility. So when we answer question number 1, we are answering and finding feasibility assumptions. Is it feasible for us to develop and deliver the solution? Question 1. Question 1. What are the technology challenges aimed at the solution? Called feasibility. Boom. All right, question number 2. Question number 2. What are the non-technical challenges? What are the non-technical challenges we have in delivering this value proposition? Farmers, large field crops, want better crop yield, field crop data, increase yield. Why don't you take a moment to write down a couple of the non-technical challenges. What are the non-technical challenges? Question number 2. What are the non-technical challenges? All right. Farmers are willing to pay for the data. Farmers will be able to use the data that we are giving them. Farmers will trust us. This is a really interesting one that comes out in this conversation. So we're flying drones over their field. We're providing them data. That could be a little sketchy to them. Kind of maybe like Big Brother watching. So farmers will trust us. Let's see, what are some of the other ones? They want to forecast, or they want to increase yield. Maybe they're doing just fine, the farmers that have large field crops. They want to, they don't, we think they want to increase their yield. Let's see. They have the budget, they're willing to pay. So do they have the budget to pay for this? Maybe farmers are even struggling with pests. I don't know, we assumed that was true without proof, that they're struggling with pests. So as you can see, question number 2 gets to a little bit more of the nuances of our value proposition. Question number 2, what are the non-technical challenges? And what we find out when we answer question number 2 is that we are finding the assumptions behind the customer, the unmet need, and the benefit. So these are question number 2 gives us assumptions in the customer unmet need benefit section of our value proposition. And what do we call those assumptions? We call them desirability. Desirability. Does the customer actually desire our value proposition? Feasibility, can we make it and deliver it? Desirability, do they want it, willing to pay, desire it? Guess that's why they call them desirability. Do they desire it? All right, so here's what I want you to do now. I want you to take a look at our list. Question number 1, assumptions. Question number 2, assumptions. So feasibility assumptions, desirability assumptions. And let's go back to our value proposition, or opportunity cycle. Be creative, ideas, hypothesis, boom, assumptions. We just identified all of the assumptions, not all of them, but some of the important ones, that we want to now design experiments in order to test them so we have the proof. So the question I have for you is, which one of these 10 assumptions do we want to test first? So I want you to take a moment and rank order your top 3 assumptions that you would test. We can build drones. The FAA rules are fine. We can fly over the farms. We can deliver images that are appropriate and valuable. The data will be usable. Battery life on the drone will be enough. There could be a long enough range that we could fly over these massive, large crops. Farmers are willing to pay. Farmers can use the data. They trust us. They want to increase yield. They have the budget. They're actually struggling with pests or struggling with drought. Put that one in there too. Rank order your top 3. What are the top 3 you would test first? Because we have limited time, limited resources. Which ones would you test first? All right, you have your top 3. Well, let's just go straight to the answer, right? We can't have a dialogue about it. It's the limitation of the video system here. But normally we would have a dialogue about it. Like, hey, what did you pick? What's the reason you picked? We can make usable data. What's the reason you picked? We have a long enough range, or the farmers trust us, so they can use the data. So here's what we know. The assumptions we always want to prioritize desirability. We always, as an entrepreneur, want to prioritize testing our desirability assumptions first. Always. We always want to test our assumptions about the customer and the unmet need before we test any assumptions around solutions. This is a common error that we might make as entrepreneurs, is that we get so infatuated with our idea and our solution. Oh, it's going to be this app's going to be the greatest thing ever. So we start to test out how do I make apps, and what's the way I can set this app up? And before we know it, we're all the way down this rabbit hole, and with blinders on, and we forget, does the customer actually want the app? Let's test that first before we do anything else. Does the farmer desire this? Can they pay for it? Can they use the data to make decisions? Will they trust us? It doesn't matter if our solution is the greatest thing ever if they don't trust us. They're not buying it. If they don't buy it, we don't have a business. We don't make any revenue. So I want to reinforce this point over and over and over again. In this class, when you are doing your field work and you're creating your value proposition, and you're going to do your final presentation in this class about your value, your concept, the experiments you ran, focus on running the experiments that test desirability, not if you can make it, or the app is going to be, 15 pages versus 20 pages. Focus on desirability. And here is a way for you to remember this. A problem without a solution is a matter of time. A solution without a problem is a waste of time. A problem without a solution is a matter of time. I mean, look, entrepreneurs, you guys are smart. You'll figure it out. As long as you've identified the problem, you have a customer that desires your solution, it's just a matter of time before that solution will emerge, and you'll be able to go to the market. But a solution without a problem is a waste of time. Building solutions without a problem is a waste of time. You don't ever want to be an entrepreneur with a solution looking for a problem to fill. That is not the way we work. The principles that we've learned in this course are the value proposition is led by the customer and the unmet need, not the solution. And here is yet another reason. Because a problem without a solution is a matter of time. A solution without a problem is a waste of time. So when you're thinking about your value proposition, you have to recognize that there are things in your value proposition accepted as true without proof because you've made it up. Now it's time to test it. In order to test it, we need to know, what are we testing? We are testing the assumptions. In order to identify the assumptions, we basically ask two questions. What are the technology or delivery challenges? If you don't have a technology solution like a service, then what are the delivery challenges? And you can answer that here. Then most importantly, what are the non-delivery challenges? That is here, and those are the assumptions around the customer and the unmet need, and some around the benefit. Those are desirability. We want to find the desirability assumptions. Then the next video, you are going to learn about all the types of experiments that you can conduct in order to test and ground the desirability assumptions. By the way, it's much harder to test desirability assumptions than it is feasibility assumptions. We can go over to the engineering building, pick up a couple of our engineering buds and say, hey, how do we translate pictures into usable data? What's the distance on drones? How hard is it to build a drone, or should we buy them? What's the battery life? We could Google that stuff. Can we deliver images? What's the FAA rules? We can Google that stuff too. Very easy, typically, to ground our feasibility assumptions. It's much harder to know if farmers are going to trust us and they're willing to pay and they can use the data and they want to increase their yield. Much, much harder. It's why entrepreneurship can be challenging. All right, let's see if we've closed that out. All right, yeah, let me close it out by saying Caress is an actual company out there. They've done fairly well. They've raised $35 million in funding and have had $2.5 million in revenue. But basically what they found is that farmers said, hey, listen, don't fly drones over the field. We are interested in this. Yes, we're struggling with this. So we trust you. We're willing to pay. We're going to use your data. But your solution's kind of a little messed up. Don't fly drones over the field. Connect a camera on the bottom of the plane that we already fly over the field to drop pesticides and things like that. Putting the camera underneath the plane as we fly the plane over to put things on our field will take care of that anyways. So Caress is like, oh wow, check that out. Let's pivot our solution. It's not going to be drones. It's just going to be a camera connected to the bottom of the plane. And so through testing what they thought was true without proof, they've made a great pivot and continue to do well. So that's it for assumptions. Hope that makes sense to you. And I look forward to seeing you on our next session or in the next video. Have a great day. Out.